Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art and culture, and today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Quelle Chris, Guns. So yeah, I'm a little bit late to the punch with this one, but in all due fairness, due to the density you typically find on Quelle Chris albums, that does make a certain amount of sense, even if they might be excellent from top to bottom. And given just how much he's been on a tear the past couple of years, with my first proper introduction coming in 2017 with my review of Being You Is Great, I Wish I Could Be You More Often, and then his fantastic follow-up last year with Everything's Fine with his partner Grae, I really wanted to ensure I gave this project my full and complete consideration. And in this case, probably more so than ever, as it seemed to be a very much in-house operation, writing the majority of the production, the album art, animating the music videos, and then surging into a loaded, fractured picture of society's relationship with guns and who might be truly culpable in the usage of such a weapon, be it the person or the tool. Yeah, that's heavy stuff, especially given his critical acclaim that he's received from both me and a ton of other critics, both beforehand and now, which set a pretty damn high bar. So alright, we're here. What do we get from Guns? Well, I think it's important to highlight a couple things. Namely that while I did review Being You Is Great, I Wish I Could Be You More Often, I did build up some familiarity with Quelle Chris's earlier discography before now, and while I wouldn't quite call this a return to form, it did showcase more of the straightforward tightness and control that I really appreciated on earlier projects like Ghost at the Finish Line or Shotgun and Sleek Rifle. Kind of ironic considering that last one. But after a solid dozen or so listens surrounding Guns, what I find more perplexing about this album is that Quelle Chris might have summed it up himself on the closing track. The story got away from the pathos, at least in terms of providing a clear and direct answer to the questions that he's putting forward on this admittedly pretty great album. And let me make one thing very clear right from the start. While guns repeatedly pop up in the rapping or cracking across some of the background production, it's very clear from the opening song that they operate more as a metaphor than anything else, a stand-in for a tool of many shapes and sizes that can be weaponized, leading to the open question of who really bears the responsibility, the tool or the person using it. And if you think Quelle Chris is gonna make that conversation easy for him or anyone else, right from the very first track, Spray and Pray, he frames his own wordplay and rapping as much of a weapon as anything else, raising the stakes by implicating himself, and then on the title track highlighting how pretty much everyone has to have some sort of weapon in today's day and age, even as the chorus begs the question, why? And now that answer, it might seem pretty obvious, but Quelle Chris doesn't shy away from hitting it. Despite systems that enforce a social contract that should have people minding their own damn business, these are systems that are founded on white supremacy and a hell of a lot of privilege and class. And to either maintain or challenge them, you need to bring some force behind you. Or, as Ugly Boy Modeling implies on his verse of It's the Law, accumulate enough wealth and privilege to assume that you can rise above and you don't really need it. Although you might want it. Because there are those people who set themselves above that law. And following in the wake of themes raised on Everything's Fine, the current president's infamous Fifth Avenue quote is repeated twice. First beforehand on the song is a straightforward assertion of callous privilege, but then from a variety of voices showing just how those systems can be challenged by everyone in that same choice, if they choose to defy the systems. And that's a fascinating through line across this album. It's not quite as violent as you would otherwise expect given that album title and that cover art. And you can tell that Quelle Chris is a little bit more accommodating of folks within his worldview than most, providing of course you can accept the dismantling of unjust systems and framing that's ever so slightly askew. But that's a secret. Such a world is attractive, and that message of possible hope will slip through the cracks plenty. From Wild Minx reframing the John the Baptist and Jesus stories through a rather revolutionary hip-hop context, ending the song with a sample of an Italian man who sought out fine suits and comfort in order to fit in with the hippies, while still clearly showing the marks of the system that has picked him and elevated him. But that then follows onto the next song, Box of Wheaties 2, where not only does Quelle Chris want to see his success reflected in a mundane but potentially inspiring way for kids being on that cereal box. But then Denmark Vessey goes even further to show how it isn't so long before those such flexing is co-opted by those very same systems that would want to exploit them and keep them down in the first place. And thus it might seem like a no-win scenario for him. You need the tools to force some sort of change, but for how long will that revolution remain televised before it winds up getting mass marketed and branded? And is it worth it if said tools are then turned against you? So it would seem like that the man is most at fault, and the usage of Sunday Mass as a list of gun massacres seems rather on the nose to make that point, but there are some complications to that picture, because then we see both the downbeat realism from Quelle Chris and the optimistic revolutionary spirit from Cavalier on Straight Shot, with some very clear awareness of the consequences going for both options. And it goes even further than that. Going back to the samples of the Italian man on Wild Minks and box of Wheaties, while he might be an easy gangster stereotype, it is very telling that all he really talks about is fashion in order to fit in. His distaste for his mother's refractive pearls, obvious point of deflection, and an uncle who would prefer comfort over easy style in the car, which later carries into the sample of a black man returning to Africa and hopping in a dilapidated car and his initial distaste for it, or even fear as it howls off into the night, only to realize years later that that car roaring down the streets of Dakar, it could represent him careening down the road of life into an uncertain darkness, a metaphor that is set up on It's the Law and then comes back subtextually on WYRM, which just so happens to be the name of the oldest of dragons who might care about mortality, one of the few D&D references in the psalm, but also an acronym of Will You Remember Me, where he wonders whether he'll be remembered most for his skill demanded by the system, which, calling back to the opening song Spray and Pray, is his symbolic gun, or whatever next step that his art will take him. And while he has the sadly realistic assumption that it will probably be the rapping skill, you only need to go back one more song earlier to You, Me, and Nobody Else to see how he uses his rapping tool to make a pretty straightforward love song to his partner Jean Grae, also featured here. So both tool and man can service both good and ill, leaving the pieces defined but the full message ever so slightly ambiguous, showing a care for good framing and nuance is exactly what I've come to expect from Quelle Chris. Now granted, for as much as I am praising the intricacy and flair of the content and themes and questions being raised, all of it is conditional upon the music being able to support that. And while for the most part I really do dig what Quelle Chris delivers here, I do have my nitpicks and quibbles, most notably with some of the percussion production. Now, as you'd expect, there's a thicker cushion of crackling lo-fi fuzz around a lot of these tracks, paired with the slow tempos, the off-kilter tunes, the occasionally binaural vocal work on songs like Mind Your Bidness, or a jazzier undercurrent that can prove remarkably melodic. But there's a weird feel to some of the beats and the drums where the impact almost seems spongy, for lack of better words, distorted and muffled in a perplexing way that I'm not quite sure I like, such on the song like It's the Law. Same with the tinny deforming of some of the pianos and vocals, or how the fidelity can never quite feel consistent song to song, especially when juxtaposed with a chip tune. And I get it's part of his style and production, but it does get a little bit distracting between songs. And while I'm on that subject, like with most Quelle Chris projects, the overall flow can feel a little misshapen, and this album is no exception. Wherever there's a sense of momentum that seems to kick in a gear, we'll get an interlude or an odd sample that just throws everything askew. And if I were to highlight a song that I didn't quite like as a whole, it would come with PSA Drugfest 2003 Sleeveless Mix. The organ tone, the child choir, it's a hard pivot to haunted, drugged out desperation that doesn't quite mesh in with the album's larger arc, and has been a persistent point of frustration across a lot of Quelle Chris's albums. He's made this sort of song before, even if in this case there's a lot more going on beneath the surface, and it is intended as a callback. But on the flip side, the spread between outright rattling bangers like the beeping grind of Mind Your Business, or to the decomposing klaxons bounced off the creepy pianos on Obamacare, to the more jazzy cuts like the guitar-driven smoothness of Box of Wheaties, the melancholy of Straight Shot backed up by Bilal Salam, to the soul sample flip and the gentle pianos behind You, Me, and Nobody Else and WYRM. Again, this album has one hell of a closer. During its back half, it really flows well. But as a whole, I guess my common statement with Quelle Chris is that he's an artist that I respect and appreciate more than I outright love. And to some extent, that is still kinda true with this album, and I'll freely admit that despite giving this a ton of listens, I'm still not quite sure where it slots among his other albums. It's a leaner set of thoughts, and in a strange way it might even be more accessible, something that even he mentions on how once you tune to his wavelength, he's not that weird, you can follow what he's saying. And you know what, for the most part, I actually agree with that. But my question comes in how often I'll wind up being on that wavelength, which might not quite be as much as I was with Everything's Fine, but probably about as much as I was with Being You Is Great, I Wish I Could Be You More Often. And this is absolutely an easier listen just on length and groove alone. So with that being in mind, yeah, I'm thinking an 8 out of 10. Definitely a recommendation among the stronger hip-hop projects of 2019 thus far, and pretty much unlike most of the rest you're gonna hear this year. And going forward, well, you know what? As long as Quelle Chris keeps on reaching, I'm gonna keep on listening. Cause it's great. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm a little surprised this review turned out as succinct as it is, given how much density there is, and there's a lot going on. But yeah, you're definitely gonna want to hear this. It's something special. If you want to buy or stream the album, links down there below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where you guys will eventually fall on this, especially with comparison to his larger discography. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And just a quick reminder, once again, if you want to see the newest episode of Billboard Breakdown, that whole series has been moved to a new channel called Billboard Breakdown, links in the title card here below. But hey, thanks a lot for watching. I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.